If there's any team that I feel like I've talked about the most this year, it would be, the team from Kolkata. Sunil Narayan was my big video at the start. Lots of questions about Pat Cummins. Obviously, Venki Iyer coming in changed everything. Owen Morgan, even Shakib Al-Hassan. I said Owen Morgan, I threw that away. Mostly it's been about Owen Morgan, though, hasn't it? Oh, and there was Andre Russell's injury, and there was Owen Morgan's batting, and Owen Morgan's captaincy. Mostly it's been Owen Morgan. Owen Morgan's been Owen Morgan. Owen Morgan, though, hasn't it?
This is the last knock. My dad refuses to tell me what this means.
I feel like Kolkata's season has just been a shopping list full of weird shit. Even at full strength, I don't really back their bowling or rate their bowling that much. Their balance is nonsensical. And for a long time, it didn't look like any of their batters could make runs, even if on paper there was no reason for that to be the case. And yet, unlike Mumbai, they got their shit together in time. Unlike Bangalore, they won that game. And unlike Delhi, they won 2 finals, not 0 finals. It's a weird team to really think about and get your head around. They were terrible in India and the kings of the UAE. It would be impossible to say that they're a better team than Delhi or Bangalore, or maybe not even that much better than Mumbai, realistically, when you look at the season in total. But when they were good was at the right time, and they had a good net run rate, and that allowed them to get into the finals and use their best weapons, the spin bowling on the wickets that turned. That's what they did, and it worked for 2 out of 3 of their finals. But it would be disingenuous not to say that there were big parts of this season where Kolkata looked like they might actually finish, well, not last. Hyderabad were always going to finish last, but second last, maybe even third last, which I suppose isn't that far out of the finals anyway in this competition, but you get my point. They were stinky. They didn't seem to know what was going on. Owen Morgan was under huge amounts of pressure, and everything that they tried to do didn't really work in the first half of the season. Partly because their entire squad doesn't really make that much sense. But I think the batting was, what's the best way of putting it? A disaster zone. Morgan didn't make any runs. Narayan didn't make any runs. Shakib didn't make any runs. Shubman Gill really never got going as much as he would have liked to. Even players who did well, like Nitish Rana and Venki Iyer, they kind of ended up with fairly slow strike rates. On paper, it looked like this incredible batting lineup, with Pat Cummins coming in at 8 and, all this sort of strength throughout the middle order. And when they actually went out in the middle, it looked disastrous. Even when they beat Delhi, it looked like they were just good enough to get over the line there. But there are a couple of their batters that really stood out, and Rahul Tripathi was obviously one of those. I think I said this on the Rajasthan video, that they allowed him to go. He just looks like a really good player to me, and also with so many Indian players being anchors, Rahul Tripathi just slaps the ball around. Unfortunately, by the time he got to the final, his body had given way, but he'd done some really good stuff all the way up to that final. He actually batted a little bit like he did all the way back in his first year in this league. He's not ever likely to be a high run scorer. I wouldn't think he'd ever average much more than 30, if that, but he's going to have a lot of higher strike rate years. He really gets you going, and with so many Indian batters chewing up balls at the start, he's an ideal opener to go with some of these other guys. Also think, just on a personal level, if you're going to find a coach that's going to understand you, you would think that Rahul Tripathi and Brendan McCullum is a pretty good match. Dinesh Karthik is just so perfectly suited to the role he plays. Every now and again, he makes some runs, and everyone wants him thrust back up the order. He doesn't really work up the order. He's perfectly suited to facing just fast bowlers towards the end of the innings. He's a high energy guy. Short innings against the kind of bowling that he likes to smash, that's perfect for him. He's not particularly good against spin, so why make him do that? And I think in some ways, the cricketer that he's turned himself into over the last, 4 or 5 years is just so much more handy. Everyone else is trying to get to the top of the order, and he's like, no. I'll fill one of these key positions in the middle. To have someone with his experience and skill, plus his second skill in that position, I think is just great for any team. Venki, as it says on his shirt, Iyer, is probably worth his own video. What a random season where everyone was talking about his university qualifications and how he almost disappeared from the game. And, he's wearing the chains around his neck and he was hatless. I repeat, hatless for many of his innings. It was bizarre. Weirdly though, for all the big swinging and big run totals that he made, he didn't actually have that high of a strike rate. He's ended up with a strike rate of 128, and if you watched him, it never really felt like that was the case. Now, I will say this, 128 in the UAE compared to everyone else, I think was still a handy strike rate, but the impact he made wasn't really matched with the strike rate he had. But he did average a good score, and there's a lot to be said about someone who just swings really hard a lot. I mean, who doesn't like that? There are some things that I think are worth thinking about going forward, like he strikes at 120 against pace. It's not a red flag, but it's an interesting thing if you're going to open the batting and you're facing a lot of pace in the power play. In fact, in the power play, he has a strike rate of 122 as well, and he's not a particularly good scorer when the ball's just outside off stump. We don't know that much about him, though. We don't know if any of these things are true or whether this was just random. The same things will happen when he goes back to Indian wickets. What will happen if he gets picked for India at one stage? We also don't know how good his bowling is at the moment. He's obviously not a bad bowler, but is he a fifth bowler ever? Probably not, although Kolkata tried him there at times. Is he a really good sixth bowler? Will his bowling work on all surfaces? Will it be even better when you get him away from Asian pitches? But there were great signs. He wasn't overawed by the occasion when he first came into the team, even for the knockout games. He seemed to feel like he belonged and was certainly playing in that way. But he's also basically an anchor, and you don't usually see people get this excited for an anchor as they have for him. And is he better than that? Is he an anchor plus, or will he even, on better batting pitches, smash the ball even further? I mean, these are all very valid questions about him. And the thing is that Kolkata's going to have to try and answer all these based on an incredibly small sample size where there's a lot of hype around him, and they're going to work out if they're going to retain him or not. It's a huge risk to retain him. But here's the other thing. It's a huge risk not to retain him. I think going forward, he's one of the most fascinating players when we get to the retention part of this league, which is soon. Googlies, quarter seamer, carom, dukes, back of the hand, red, leg cutters, teesra, pink, knuckle, white, slider, seed, heavy, bouncers, cherry, length, pill, off-cutters, old, crimson traveller, kookaburra, hard, outswing, second new, off-spin, arm, SG, split finger, shiny, leg spin, soft, new, yorkers, flippers, wrong-uns, long hops, reverse swing, half volley, and third new. These are just some of the names we use for balls in cricket. Well, Manscaped wants you to be as proud of your balls as you are of the ones delivered by your favourite cricketer. Manscaped just launched their 4th generation trimmer, the Lawnmower 4.0. Join over 2 million men worldwide who trust Manscaped with this exclusive offer, 20% off and free worldwide shipping. Insert the code REDINKA at manscaped.com. I've actually used this, not just something that I'm hawking for fun, and I got to admit, I thought it was a bit silly, and then I went down there, and it was exceptional. I honestly feel I could bowl outswing with one nut and inswing with the other. So get 20% off and free worldwide shipping with the code REDINKA at manscaped.com. Manscaped, for the man who cares about his balls as much as the ones out in the middle. Early in the season, Kolkata had a Prashif Krishna fetish, and I get it. He's tall and he's fast, and India had used him as a bowler, and you could see there's incredible potential there, even if, there's a lot of moving parts and things can go wrong. But the thing is that in Kolkata's side, they have Shivam Mavi. He was already bowling better, I thought, and also fits this team a lot better. Now, I do understand he's shorter and slower, and he isn't as sexy a package as Prashif. But he's like a very, very good bowler. And you look at his numbers as a local seamer, and he's certainly holding his own, if not even above that, despite the fact that he hasn't yet played a full season. But I think it's even more remarkable because Mavi is a new ball bowler, and Prashit can't really bowl there. Prashit, you need at least 5 men on the boundary, maybe 6. Whereas Mavi, I think he's probably going to end up being probably, if not a specialist with the new ball, then certainly that will be his main skill. And I thought once he came back into the side, it was one of the first times I thought, this team almost makes sense now. It's almost fits in together as a T20 team should. And because he was back in the side, I just felt like the whole of Kolkata was a better team afterwards. And let me explain this. This allowed them to use Varun Chakravarti and Sunil Narine, who I don't really need to talk about because they're very good. But it allowed them to use them in the middle together, which meant they fed off each other, which also meant that opposition teams couldn't get anywhere against these two. Now, maybe the UAE conditions played a part, because certainly Chakravarti and Narine were much better once they got to the UAE, but I think it was largely because they got to bowl together a lot more. Beforehand, it was Pat Cummins and Prashid Krishna and even Andre Russell bowling in the middle overs. Suddenly, they were squeezing with these two incredibly skillful bowlers. And because Mavi could bowl at the top, it meant that they didn't have to use Tim Southee unless they really wanted to use him, and that Lockie Ferguson didn't have to be over-bowled at the top, which meant that they could cover their problems at the death by bowling him more there. And on that Tim Southee thing, without Andre Russell around, and because they weren't going to drop Owen Morgan, it meant that they could bring in Shakib Al Hassan, which gave them even more spin and gave them a better combination throughout, and they didn't have to use Chakravarti at the top as much because they had Shakib for that job. And Mavi just kind of allowed all these different things. And it's not the only time that a player came in and completely changed their lineup, because we've already talked about Venki Iyer as well. Those two moves of Mavi and Iyer Kolkata were probably the main catalyst for where they are now. Obviously, the Aya decision has got a lot more press than the Marvi one has, but they basically allowed the rest of the team to play their roles a little bit better. And they had to do this, of course, because they were missing Andre Russell. I mean, a lot of this incredible form in the second part of the year was without Andre Russell, and it was with Owen Morgan, who could not find a run. He did not know what a run was. It's possible at one stage he could not spell the word run. So, of course, picking a first-year player, especially one who's a little bit older, and going back to the slightly slower fast bowler is a risk. The thing is that almost everything that Kolkata did was a risk. Keeping Owen Morgan was a massive risk. Backing Sunil Narayan through the earlier part of the season, after what happened last year, was another risk. The Prashid Krishna situation was a risk. Sunil Narayan up the order was a risk. Rahul Tripathi is, in some ways, a bit of a risk. I mean, this team didn't make sense, and so Kolkata kept throwing various combinations at the wall until one of them worked. In a short season, usually that probably wouldn't work. Usually they would have just not made the finals, but they scraped through, and they were playing their best cricket up until they went up against the best team. There's obviously an element of luck in Kolkata making the final, and in winning the first playoff game, and in winning the second playoff game, and it ran out by the time they got to the final. But they also have to be applauded for saying, fuck it, let's just go for it. And sometimes those things just work. It was going to be a throwaway season. It's right before the mega auction. They gave themselves the best possible chance of winning the title, when for the first half of the season, they gave themselves the best possible chance of finishing last. You have to respect the fact that they were willing to make this many changes, and then you have to just applaud the fact that so many of them worked. Was there luck there? Of course there was, but that's T20 cricket. I don't know where this team goes from here. The retention thing is weird. Owen Morgan won't be the captain next year, would be my bet. And as good as they were, they still looked a long way short of what Chennai were. But they saved a terrible season, and it'll be remembered as something slightly better. And maybe it's good news for the franchise going forward. They have been kind of average for a long time now. Say what you want about them. By the end of the year, they were not average.